We're starting lesson 9 for group 2, and this is about applying the properties of addition and subtraction to rational numbers. There's nothing really new in this lesson. It's going to be more working with fractions and things like that, and actually taking numbers apart, the fractions apart, and then trying to find, we talked about this a little bit in the last lesson, seeing if there's an easier way to work through a problem than doing it just from left to right. Okay, so let's get going. The first exercise, exercise 1, it says, unscramble the cards and show the steps in the correct order to arrive at the solution. So we have 5 and 2/9 minus, 8.1 plus 5 and 2/9. Now, something we have not talked about as much in this group, we talked about a lot with group 1 when we were in class, is the distributive property. And what that basically means, now we know that this minus sign that's right there, the thing that comes after that, we have to change the sign. That's how it works. So if we had anything after the subtraction sign, we change it to, if it's a positive, we would change it to a negative we add a positive. But what's after the subtraction sign is a parentheses. So if we wanted to, you could go ahead and add the numbers inside of the parentheses first, and you could go about it doing it that way. Or because the minus sign is in front of the parentheses, what we could do is change everything inside the parentheses. So this is, again, something that's a little different. So because we have a negative sign out here, or a subtraction sign, we want to turn it into an addition. But that means everything inside the parentheses gets changed. So we have a positive 8.1 and a positive 5 and 2/9. Both of them you have to change it. So if this was a negative 5 and 2/9, you would change it to positive. But since they're both positive, when you change this into a plus, both those numbers are going to become negative. So let's go ahead and do that, and just that step, and when you're ready, let's continue. Okay, so I wrote the problem out, the original problem, which is 5 and 2/9 minus 8.1 plus 5 and 2/9. I changed that to an addition sign, and then I changed positive 8.1 to negative 8.1, and then positive 5 and 2/9 to negative 5 and 2/9. Okay, so from here, we have a couple different options. Now, as we have it right here, we have a decimal and we have a fraction, which is already going to cause you trouble. Now, if you went ahead and we're going to do it from left to right, you would either have to change one of those into a fraction, or the decimal into a fraction, or you'd have to change the fraction into a decimal. If you change the decimal into a fraction, then you have to find a common denominator and all the steps with that. But instead of doing it that way, and hopefully you saw this, we have 5 and 2/9 plus a negative 5 and 2/9. So if we're thinking about like on the number chart, if we had a negative 1 plus a positive 1, negative 1 means you go 1 to the left, positive 1 means you go 1 to the right. So think about what that would be. If we have one number that's positive and the same number would be a negative, well, that just equals 0. So that's basically what they're trying to get you to think about. You also can separate the numbers, which we did in the last problem, or in the last lesson, from the fraction, meaning instead of writing it as 5 and 2/9, you could write it as 5 plus 2/9 plus, parentheses, negative 8.1 plus negative 5 plus negative 2/9. So basically what I did is I took the mixed numbers and I separated it from the fraction. So 5 plus 2/9 plus 8 plus negative 8.1 plus negative 5 plus negative 2/9. Now that doesn't really serve a purpose in this problem, but in some of the problems you're going to see that we're going to work on today, that's actually going to be kind of helpful if you do that. But let's just go back to the last step. So we have 5 and 2/9 plus a negative 5 and 2/9. Those just cancel each other out. So you're left with negative 8.1. So you could have went ahead and did all this work if you just went from left to right, not looking at the problem, and you've probably been really annoyed with yourself if you ended up with just right back to where you started with. Then you would probably looked at the numbers and realized what was going on, that you had a positive and a negative. And that's why you have to take a look at what you're doing, not just do the operations without thinking. All right, so this one is kind of similar to the one we were just looking at. So it says, represent each one of the following expressions as one rational number. Show and explain your steps. So basically this one, it's similar to what we just did. We have the negative sign outside of a parentheses. The next thing after that is a parentheses. Now, if there was a number after that, let's say it was 4 and 4/7 minus 2, and then the parentheses, you would just change the 2, because that's what comes after the parentheses. Whatever comes after the parentheses, that's what you have to change the signs of. And for this problem, it's a parentheses, which means everything in the parentheses gets changed. But notice there's already a subtraction sign inside the parentheses. So you probably, the best way to do it is always do inside the parentheses first, meaning change the sign inside the parentheses. So you have 4 and 4/7 minus 10. You want to change that first. And then when you do that, then you want to do the subtraction sign outside the parentheses, but make sure you do everything that's inside the parentheses. So the subtraction sign for inside here, the one that comes before the 10, that's only going to affect 10 because it's inside the parentheses. There's nothing else there. The number comes right after the subtraction sign. So we change that to a plus. That's only going to affect the 10. But then when you change this subtraction sign, the one after 4 and 4/7 minus, and then you have the parentheses, that's going to affect both of the numbers inside of the parentheses. Okay? So do this in 2 steps. Take your time. That's kind of the most important thing in these types of problems. If you take your time and do it 1 step at a time, you're a lot less likely to make a mistake than if you just kind of rush through it. So first step, obviously write the original problem out, don't do anything. Then change the subtraction sign inside the parentheses and make your adjustments. And then change the subtraction sign outside the parentheses, okay? And when you're ready with that, you continue. All right, so let's have a look on how you did. Okay, so first one, we have 4 and 4/7 minus parentheses 4 and 4/7 minus 10. That was the original problem. So the next step, all we're doing is changing this subtraction sign into an addition sign. And the only thing after that is the 10, which is right up here. It's positive. We're going to change it into a negative. So it's negative 10. So everything else stays the same. We have 4 and 4/7 minus 4 and 4/7 plus negative 10. Only thing that's changed was the 10. And then over here we have 4 and 4/7. We're going to change that into plus. And because we do that, everything in the parentheses changes. So this was positive 4 and 4/7 in the last step. Now it's negative 4 and 4/7 because we changed the sign. And negative 10 up here then goes back to being positive. So we went from positive to negative to positive. And that's just sometimes how it works out. So from this point, we have 4 and 4/7 plus a negative 4 and 4/7. It's all addition, so it doesn't matter what order you do it in. You don't have to do this first in the parentheses because it's all addition. It won't make a difference. So with this, you just add 4 and 4/7 and negative 4 and 4/7. And once again, you get an answer of 10. Okay, so they just cancel each other out. Okay, let's go on with number 2. This one is not quite as easy as that one. Actually, there's not a lot other than if you remember how we did subtracting with these fractions with positive negative numbers. So we have 5 plus a negative 4 and 4/7. So go ahead, just work that entire problem out. Set it up and get your answer. And when you are ready, resume the video. Okay, so looking at this problem, we have 5 and a negative 4 and 4/7. What's larger? Well, first of all, let's go back. We have positive plus a negative, which means you're going to be subtracting them. Even though it's an addition sign, we have two opposite signs. Positive plus a negative means you subtract. But which one is larger? Which one is farther from 0? Is 5 farther than negative 4 and 4/7? The answer is no. 5 is further. 5 is the larger number. So 5 should be at the top of your subtraction problem, and 4 should be at the bottom. It also tells you this answer is going to be positive. 5 is greater than 4 and 4/7, so the answer is going to be positive. All right, so take a look over here. So I already did all the work, but when you get to the problem, you have 0 minus 4/7. You can't do that. So you borrow from the 5. 5 becomes a 4. And once again, we have no fraction. So we can change that denominator to be whatever we want it to be, as long as it equals 1 whole, 2 over 2, 3 over 3. So we make it into 7 over 7 because we already have the denominator of 7. So why would we choose anything but that? So 7 over 7 minus 4 over 7 is 3/7, and 4 minus 4 is 0. So we are done. Okay? All right, so the next part, if I'm not mistaken, is a whole bunch of very similar problems. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see, so 4 problems here. So they're going to ask you, or think about trying to do this in a way to make it a little bit easier on yourself, if possible. For most of these, there's a little trick that will help you get the answer a little bit easier, okay? So why don't we just do these one at a time, and that way you just, if you get one incorrect, you won't have them all incorrect. So we have, starting off with negative 5.2 minus a negative 3.1 plus 5.2. Go ahead and solve that. And when you're done, continue the video with just letter A. Okay, so for this problem, down here, we have negative 5 and 2/10 minus negative 3.1 plus 5.2. So we have a subtraction sign. So first thing we should be doing is changing that into addition. And the number after it is negative. That means it becomes positive. So now we have negative 5.2 plus 3.1 plus a positive 5.2. Now again, you could do these in order, but I have a negative 5.2 and a positive 5.2. Those cancel each other out and give you 0. So 0 plus 3.1 is 3.1. Quick and easy. Okay, let's take a look at letter B. Okay, so letter B could be a little bit more challenging, I guess, depending on how you do it. Go ahead and solve this problem, and when you're done, continue the video. Okay, so we have positive plus a negative, so you're going to be subtracting these two numbers. Hopefully you knew to put 32 at the top, but the problem is, once again, you're going to have to borrow, because over here we have 32 over 12 and 7/8. Well, there is no fraction for 32, so we have to borrow. Borrow 1 from 32, it would become 31. And once again, we can choose our fractions denominator. So 8 over 8 makes sense. 8 over 8 minus 7 over 8 is 1/8. And 31 minus 12 is 19. So our answer is 19 and 1/8. Okay? All right. So letter C. So we have 3 and 1/6 plus 20.3 minus a negative 5 and 5/6. There is definitely an easier and more difficult way to do this problem. So I will be doing or showing the easier way. Try to look for little shortcuts when you do this problem. Okay? When you're ready, resume. Okay, so for this problem, I did a little extra step here, so you can hopefully see how I got what I got. Okay, so we have 3 and 1/6 plus 20.3 minus a negative 5 and 5/6. First step is to change everything into an addition. We have one subtraction sign right after 20.3. So that becomes 3 and 1/6 plus 20.3 plus 5 and 5/6. Now there's a couple reasons for doing this. First of all, there's a lot of rules with subtracting an integer, and you definitely don't want to have to do that. The other thing is, when you're dealing with subtraction, you cannot move your numbers around. But if I change it into addition, I can shift these numbers however I want. It's all addition, so it doesn't matter. If I kept this as subtraction, I pretty much have to keep 20.3 minus negative 5 and 5/6 until I complete that part. But because I changed it to addition, I can move things around. And I see that 3 and 1/6 and 5 and 5/6 both have the same denominator of 6th. So I did this extra step. You did not have to write it out, but it would make sense to do this part first. Do 3 and 1/6 plus 5 and 5/6 first, and then when you're done, add 20.3. Now, it just so happens that this works out incredibly well. So we have 5 and 5/6 plus 3 and 1/6, which gets us 5/6 and 1/6 gives us 6/6. This is positive plus a positive. So we just add them together. And then 5 and 3 is 8. So 6/6 is 1 whole. So we just add 1 to, I'm going to write that out for you. So this 6 over 6 equals 1 whole. So what I'll do is take this 1 whole and I'll add it to the 8 over there. And my answer is just 9 plus 20.3. And I get 29.3. Definitely a lot easier. If you were going to do it the other way, you would either have to change 3/10.3 into a fraction or all these fractions into decimals. And all of these would be, I believe, are repeating decimals. So you're going to end up with even a less accurate answer if you do it that way as well. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about, is where you look at something that's like, how can I make this a little bit easier? Sometimes there won't be an option, but other times there will be. All right, so here's our last one of these, and then there's, I think, one more problem, and then it's on to the problem set for today. So yeah, 16 over 20 minus negative 1.8 minus 4/5. So once again, there's definitely an easier way to do this problem and a more difficult way. So go ahead, set this up, solve it to get your final answer, and then continue the video. All right, so let's see how you did. So once again, we have two fractions and a decimal. A lot of work there if you want to change 1.8 into a fraction, or change the fractions into a decimal. The quicker, easier way to solve this problem would be to take 4/5 and right away add it to the fraction, which is 16 over 20, and that's what I did. So 16 over 20 minus negative 1.8 minus 4/5. Now I handled both subtraction signs at the same time. Feel free to do them separately if you get confused. So the first one, we have 16 over 20. I'm going to change that subtraction sign into an addition sign and change negative 1.8 to positive 1.8. So now I have 16 over 20 plus 1.8. That's positive. Now for this one, we have minus 4/5, but 4/5 is positive. There's no negative sign there. So I'm going to change that to plus negative 4/5. So now I have 16 over 20 and a negative 4/5. So positive and negative, that means these two are going to be subtracted from each other. And I did the work over here. A good common denominator is to do 20. You could have done 40. It won't make any difference. You just have to do a little bit extra work. But anyway, you'll see that the two fractions, 4/5 and 16 over 20, are exactly the same. So when you subtract them from each other, you get 0, just like before. So if I add 0 to 1.8, I get 1.8. So that's my answer, 1.8. Okay? All right, so the last one, and a lot of this they tell you to show step by step. If you show your work, it should be it definitely would just be in there. Okay, so this one is a little bit more complicated than the ones we were doing, but you should give it a try, and if you don't get it right, hopefully you get it right when it's on your problem set. So it says, explain step by step how to arrive at a single rational number to represent the following expressions. Show both a written explanation and a related math work for each step. Okay, so don't worry too much about the written explanation. Like I said, if you show your work, should be able to get it. Now, there's a couple different options for this one. So we have negative 24 minus negative half minus 12 and a, or sorry, yeah, minus 12 and a half. So go ahead and set this one up. So change everything into an addition, and then we'll talk about it again. Okay, so once again, I did both of the subtraction signs at the same time. So I have negative 24 minus negative 1/2. So because that's a negative 1/2 and I change that to addition, that becomes a positive half. And then I have minus 12.5. So I change that to plus negative 12.5. Now the question here is there an easier way to get this answer? So we have negative 24, we have a positive half, and then we have a negative 12 and 12.5 or 12 and a half. For me, I would probably add the two regular numbers together and leave the fraction to the end. Just seems to be the best way to go about it because we have two regular numbers and then we have one fraction. If you wanted to, you could add the half to negative 12.5, but that requires, if you know what 1/2 is as a decimal, that makes it a whole lot easier. But if not, we will do that in the last step. So for right now, just add the two negative numbers together, negative 24 and negative 12.5, and then when you're ready, we'll talk about the last step. Okay, so we add these together. You should have got negative 36.5, and you get that because the decimals do have to line up. In 24, the decimal is right here. In addition, subtraction, and this would be an addition problem because both of them are negative. Negative plus a negative, you just add the numbers together. Decimal, decimal, decimal. All the decimals line up in a straight row, so we get 5, 6, 3, so negative 36.5. Okay? So that takes us to the last part. We're at 36.5 and half. So again, if you know what half is as a decimal, this makes it a little bit easier. Not that this is very difficult anyway. So to change this into a decimal, we have to divide the denominator into the numerator, meaning the bottom number into the top number. So 2 goes into 1, and you're going to end up with the decimal because it's going to be less than 1. 2 goes into 10. 5 times, and we're basically done. So we have 0.5. So we should write that over. So 36.5 plus 0.5. Okay? So we have 36.5 plus 5. So we have a negative plus a positive. So that means these two numbers, you're going to subtract them. Which number is greater? The greater number has to go at the top. 36 or 0? Hopefully, you know that 36 will be larger in terms of the number's distance from 0. So that goes at the top, and we make sure the decimals line up. That's the most important thing when we're doing this. That's a positive number. It doesn't matter. The answer is going to be negative because the larger number is negative. 5 minus 5 is 0. We bring the decimal down. 6, 3. We get negative 36. Now, you might have gotten this answer a little bit quicker if you knew half. Way at the top here, if you knew that half is always the same decimal as 0.5. So even over here, we have 36.5. If you know, oh, this is negative plus a positive, basically I'm going to take away that 0.5. You end up with 36. Or you could take away the 0.5 up here if you really know your fractions. Know half is 0.5. And this is a positive 0.5, positive 0.5, negative 12.5. That'll give me 12. And then 12 plus 24 is 36. So a couple different options in terms of what you're going to do there. Just keep that in mind when you go ahead and do your problem set. So for these, look for the easier way if there is one. Sometimes there won't be anything available. You just have to do the problem. Just remember that if you're going to look at a problem, you have like number 3, you have fractions and decimals. You can't add a fraction to a decimal. You either change the decimals into a fraction, which is probably what most of you would end up doing. changing it to a fraction is a little bit, we really didn't get to that before we broke. So go ahead, do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and that'll take us to lesson 10, which will be on Friday. Okay, so if there are any questions, leave them below. Otherwise, see you next time.